Hi, guys. Oh, Tekmate. Jafakri. It's wonderful to see you guys. Thanks, Sam. I'm going to sit down and, or do we have a hand mic or?
We do have a floor mic.
Okay.
So if you want, go ahead and take your seat.
Okay.
And then we're there, we'll just lead it off to our moderator for further
Terrific.
questions.
Great.
Round of applause, ladies and gentlemen.
This is work. Ooh, you have to be really intimate. Yeah, great. And just in case I want to move around.
We'll go ahead and start off with one question, and if anyone else has any questions, please start lining up. We do have a line moderator on this side, so if you want to go ahead and head over. My first question to you, Tony, is given some of your history, that you've been in some sci-fi movies before, do you prefer to work with sci-fi movies, or is it something that you just happen to land?
Initially it was just something you happen to land. You'll find with a lot of the guys who end up, and gals who end up doing sci-fi, that they came out of the theater because some of the language is more technical and sometimes a little bit difficult. And just simply the size and the scope of it, the ideas of sci-fi are, I think there's a parallel to that. But ultimately, because of that, initially my experience with sci-fi is that, I went to the opening weekend or the, first several weeks of Star Wars. I was in school in Philadelphia when it first came out, and, I loved Blade Runner. I loved Alien, but I didn't have like a huge interest in some of the serials. It was more, I used to watch, Twilight Zone or Alcoa Presents or, some of those odd shows. And it was through friends of mine, when I eventually came into LA, who were working in the genre, that I started watching it. And then I eventually, got work in it. And then I started paying much more attention to it and, really have enjoyed it. I don't have a preference. I don't treat the work any differently. Whatever genre is in, I try to ask the same questions and try to, attack it with the same energy. So, I love doing sci-fi. I mean, you do enough, sort of lawyer shows where you're playing a judge or a lawyer or a talking head. You can't wait to get a funny costume on and ask to use your imagination, and to imagine and also to examine what's going on now. Because, I mean, we all know, you guys know far better than I, that science fiction is not really about the future, it's about the present. It's about our present and what we're afraid of, what we hope for. It's all of those things that make, I think, science fiction really sort of potent and interesting. So.
Thank you. What motivated you as from a child, or just as you mentioned before, seeing some of those movies, those sci-fi movies, that kind of really pushed you towards these types of actings? Is there anything in particular that you can remember?
Well, oddly enough, I had a strange thing happen. I must have been about 11, and back then, this would have been in the 50s, early 60s, really, and daycare was an after-school job because my parents worked, and that was my daycare. I never realized it, but they felt better knowing that I had something to do, because I would get in trouble. So I had a paper route. Always had a paper route from the time I was like 8 years old. But this particular day, it was Halloween, and I wandered into a barber shop that was verging on, it was the beginning of it used to be a real separation. There were beauty salons, and then there were men's barbershops. And this was a men's salon. It was a new thing. And I happened to walk in, and the guy I used to deliver a paper to, who was an old friend of my elder brother's, he had a friend there who had just finished makeup school, for film, theater, and television. And, and I remember he had some stuff out, and I was looking it all over, and they were chatting. He said, well, for instance, he said, this kid, I could make him up in, in an hour, and he'd look great. And so the guy who owned the barbershop said, well, come back when you're done with your route. And I did. and he made me into a werewolf. And it was amazing. So that was my Halloween, when I was 11. I was a werewolf. And I mean, he put surgical glue, and it was just all, and I had a lot more hair then, and he sprayed it all silver. And if you saw I Was a Teenage Werewolf, or if you saw the original, any of those werewolf ones, that's exactly what I looked like. I mean, it was just wonderful. And I scared everyone who went around, and my mother was just like, what are you, what did you get into? And it was all great and dandy until no one told us how to get it off. So we had a tough night, but we figured it out with some, hot compresses, and oil cuts through some of that stuff, But that's where it began, oddly enough. But I wasn't a high school actor. I was more into athletics, and it sat dormant. And it was like this thing in the back of my mind. Because initially I thought, oh, okay, I want to be a makeup artist. And if you had asked me, after saying that I wanted to be an archaeologist, then I wanted to be a makeup artist. But I had really no artistic skills in that way, really. So eventually when I was in college, I literally stumbled into an audition for The Tempest, Shakespeare's The Tempest. And I went to a college where there was 4 women for every man, so they were very happy to see me. And I was very happy to see them. So, I spent, a lot of time there, and it was quite social. I talked a little bit about that in my panel yesterday. And eventually, it was only then that I gradually realized that there was something important, and there was something that I wanted to do. And I sort of just, worked very, very hard for a number of years, and eventually I find myself here in front of all of you, and it's still something I'm immensely grateful for, and I don't take for granted, and it's a dream come true. So thanks.
Very good. Now, it's known that you're also working on Once Upon a Time, another TV series. There is also somewhere that you're working on on a show called Conception, I believe.
Continuum.
Oh, Continuum, I'm sorry. Not to be mistaken with
Not
Stargate.
Stargate Continuum. Well, I can talk a little bit about it.
Continuum, and I believe that plays in Canada, correct?
Yeah, premieres in Canada tomorrow night, so you can look for it on cable. Eventually we'll find an American window, but it's 10 episodes of a new sci-fi series that is contemporary sci-fi in that it's time travel, but it also incorporates the Occupy movement. So it's very, very interesting. I play the leader of, basically the premise is that it's 2077 and governments have failed, and so all the countries are being run by corporations. And I play the leader of a group who try to essentially bring back the voice of the people. Unfortunately, they've been pushed to the edge, and now it's through violence on the scale of 9/11. So they're very sort of gray, at least my character, called Kagame, is a very, very gray hero, in quotes. But it's very interesting. Lexa Doig is in it, who you may know, and Rachel Nichols, and we did 10 episodes. We just finished several weeks ago. So.
Very good. With that as well, then, having played all these roles and having been in that type of business for a very long time, I'm assuming that you've probably wanted to direct. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Now, with that said, there's also been rumors out there that you are going to Sundance Director's Cut, or is there?
I'm going to Sundance Director's Lab, which is a program in Utah, Robert Redford's, and it's for developing directors. I am not directing. I have directed, but it's all been in the theater. I've never really had a strong desire to direct film or television because it is so technical in many, many ways, and I'm afraid I get lost with the actors. But, unless I could come up with an idea that I wanted to write and develop, because the real power in television, as I learned as an actor, are the writers. In film, it's much more the director. But in television, it's the writers, and the director may have been hired just before the actors. There used to be there was a casting person for the Star Trek series. His name was Ron Sherma, who doesn't He doesn't, he's retired now. But I'll never forget one of the first auditions I had in LA was with him. And I came in and I came out of the theater. So I thought I was auditioning for the director. You know, and I would consequently, you know, all my conversation was to them. And the producers, the writers, you know, I didn't know, you know. And Ron was reading with me. And the entire time we were reading, I'm reading with him here. And the director's sitting right next to him. And the producers and the writers are all here. And he really liked me. So, and I'm reading with him, and the entire time he's going, meaning open up and make the producers and the producers and the writers see you. Don't audition for this schmuck. He just came into the room, you know, and it was a really interesting lesson. You know, he taught me something. I didn't get the job that time, but I eventually did.
So then directing, do you foresee yourself perhaps directing something in the future? Maybe
you know, it would have to be something really unique and someone who really knew me, you know, because like I say, it's quite technical, particularly, you know, in this genre where so much right now is green screen. You know, the Once Upon a Time, we had 2 or 3 days of green screen on there, and it's quite technical. And I mean, I wouldn't mind giving it a shot at some point. And if I were on a series now, and once it was established and there was sort of a pattern to it, then I would like to do it. Yeah.
Very good. We'll go ahead and open it up to the first question on the floor.
Hi.
Hi.
Is this on? Okay. So I was wondering what it's like to be a Jaffa from putting the golden thing on your head for the first time to the redemption from the gold, all the way to being tied into the story with the Ori.
Well, do you have 10 years? You know, being, do you know that there are Jaffa or Jaffa cookies in Australia? Boy, I got just like boxes and boxes and boxes when I went to Australia. What is it like? You know, it was really great because I tried, when I first heard the notion of what they are, you have to make it make sense to yourself. And to me, it made sense a little bit in the sort of samurai tradition and also in the Roman Stoic tradition. Never getting too high, never getting too low, and it's just carrying on, you know, with your life and denying, not truly denying the senses, but not giving way to them. But the samurai tradition, the warrior tradition, was quite helpful. You know, the Bushido and all of that. Now I'm trying to think, and also what was really compelling was the notion of being free, the notion of fighting for your freedom and living in a society where at least Braytak has what he thinks is a truth, and realizing that, you know, everything around him is almost illusion. It's almost a little bit like, oh God, the Keanu Reeves, what is it? The Matrix. I mean, he, in a strange kind of way, it's the Matrix. Everyone is convinced that they're gods. Everyone's convinced that, and he finally sees, you know, and then who he trusts that secret with, and who he tries to protect was very interesting and became really sort of potent. And so I really enjoyed that. I enjoyed the writing. Probably my favorite episode was Threshold, which does the backstory of Tilk and myself when I finally revealed to him and call him out on he knows the truth when he's just been made first prime. There's a great scene where we're training in the snow. I don't know if you remember that, so you try to attach again, like I said earlier, is that, you know, sci-fi is about the present, and that's not true for anyone more than it is an actor as they're trying to make sense of it. You're not trying to get into some theoretical mind game. You're trying to, you know, give you a desire that will carry you on a scene, you know, that will fuel your passion, and tying it back into the present is very valuable. I love the writing on Stargate. You know, once they got over the notion of trying to kill me, and I realized, probably around season 5, or season 6, I just sort of took a deep sigh and realized it would be anticlimactic to kill me now. Because you've been sort of hinting, and I wanted to die, and you wanted to kill me. And so, gradually, it's funny, when this is in the air, the other actors come up to you and they say, oh, I hope they keep you around, and I hope they keep you, and I hope they don't kill Braytak. And then you always have to be careful when you say that and you're an actor to another actor, because they ended up killing them. So poor Carmen got killed, and Taro was the toughest one. I mean, she didn't see that coming at all, and and they tried to give a sort of surprise, and they ended up getting rid of her character, which was very sad. I loved her, and I used to go over to her house and have dinner and drink a lot. So I really missed her around. By the way, I just saw her a couple of weeks ago, and she has a young child now. Yeah, a beautiful, beautiful little girl named London. Quite beautiful. So the Jaffa, it's it was a noble cause that I could get behind, and it sustained me for 10 years. So, thank you.
Hi, Tony.
Hey.
First thing I'd like to say is thank you. My daughters actually grew up sitting on the sofa with me, watching your show, watching Stargate, and it was a great bonding experience. But what we really appreciated was I'll say the tolerance and the temperament that Braytak brought, the balance of wisdom, and that was amazing. So first off, thanks for that.
Thank you.
But I'm really curious in your new show, Continuum. Now, you had mentioned the Occupy movement and 9/11, so I was just really curious. Do you see your new character as more of a liberator and patriot, or actually a terrorist who's after anarchy and extreme reform?
You're talking about Continuum now, yeah. Definitely I have to see, if I'm playing the character, I have to see him as a liberator. If you're playing the character. I think he's a troubled character, because if over the course of it you realize he didn't start as Che. He started as Gandhi. So he started, there's some earlier flashback scenes when he's with his family and he's trying to preach sort of a nonviolent sort of approach to, and eventually, it's just like stamped on. I mean, it's just, this is, boots, and, he's separated, his wife is taken away, his child is taken away, and he's left with nothing. And hopefully some of that will come, will be clear. But he is, I certainly don't advocate his means. I don't. But, when you look at a lot of film, television, et cetera, all great literature, it's not about, it's always about pathology. It's always about extremes of emotion. It's never about, balance, because it wouldn't be interesting. And so he's pushed to the edge, and he does go over the edge. Just, it's interesting to see Motorcycle Diaries, to see, these guys. You tend to think of revolutionaries only when they became revolutionaries, as if they came into the world that way. And it's always interesting to track, just like it is, with the leaders of the American Revolution, to see who they were and what gave them the courage to push beyond the norm. So that's a little bit true for Kagame, but he's also a twisted guy, too. I don't want to give you the wrong idea. He is a little twisted, which is great. It was wonderful, because I was filming Kagame while I did the last episode. They changed the schedule so I could do Once Upon a Time, which, so Geppetto and Kagame, it was so wonderful to, a guy who's all about giving, a child a chance and protecting, a kind of innocence, and another guy who's all about ideas. And if it takes 1 million lives, he somehow in his mind thinks it's okay. It's quite an interesting thing. But let me say one other thing. As an actor, you often have to be an advocate for your character. You can't, in the wider picture, it's not like we're dumb, we can't see the evil or the danger of some of these people, but when you're playing them, you have to believe them, you have to somehow give them their say, and let the audience decide whether they're right or wrong. Thank you.
I was just wondering, what is it like in the beginning as playing Master Braytek using a sort of pseudo-language per se?
Yeah, it's always interesting to to understand what which sort of it's a little bit like speaking Klingon, you know. I mean, there was a Bible, there was a sort of Jaffa Bible, but eventually we twisted it and changed it a little bit. But it was great fun. I like that. I like that, you know, and I thought we could have used it more. I thought there should have been scenes where, you know, Tilk and I sort of, you know, start talking behind their back. It's like being in a room when people are speaking, I don't know, Azerbaijani or something, you know. You have no idea what they were saying, but it's fun. It adds a kind of other dimension, you know, that you realize that English is not really their first language or something. It's sort of fun. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hello, Tony.
Hey.
I was curious about, you know, the process on how you became Master Braytech. I mean, how did you get the role?
Okay. It's actually a good. Some of this will be repeating for the people that were here yesterday, so I beg your indulgence. But I had just finished The Mask of Zorro, and I got back into town probably the end of May, in June, and then the first audition I had was for this odd sort of show where they want you to play a 133-year-old sort of warrior. Fine, whatever. You know, I read the script, seemed fun. Richard Dean Anderson, fine. You know, good. You know, MacGyver. Yeah. And but then I saw at the bottom it said Vancouver, Canada. Now this was 1997. So about 1983, my wife and I took a vacation. We were working in San Francisco at the time, and we flew to Vancouver, and then took the train across to Banff, which is in the Canadian Rockies, and then had a car and went to Jasper. So it's right all in the Canadian Rockies, glacial lakes, Lake Louise, stunning wilderness. And we had a wonderful, wonderful time. So we thought, Vancouver. So, you know, I went out and did the audition. The fact that I had just done Zorro helped, I think, enormously, because there were very good actors in the room auditioning, I see all the time. But, you know, I had just done this film, and they thought, and I had done a good audition. So you often see that. That's why when there are like little clusters, when an actor or an actress does something, all of a sudden you see them in more and more. It's like everyone's trying to ride. Oh, yeah, you never know. Oh, and Zorro was, quite a nice success. It wasn't out at the time, though. So I got it, and I thought, oh, great, Vancouver. My wife and I had a great time. And then it dawns on me, 133 years old. I'm going to be in a makeup chair from about 4 o'clock every morning. So I go in, I do my costume fitting, it's all great. I'm just about ready to sneak out because I'm not going to mention it if they're not going to mention it. And they said, hey, Tony, Jan Newman wants to see you, the makeup geek. And I go in, and I'm thinking, I say, hi, I'm Tony Amendola, I'm playing Braytech, 133 years old. And she looks at me very carefully. She really gives me the once-over. You know, and then she goes, you'll be fine. Whoa! And it dawned on me all they were going to do is, put the little thing, give it a little nail gun in the forehead, and that was it. So it was great. That was sort of how it happened. And often, as an actor, you are told, okay, this is a recurring character. My experience is anytime someone tells me it's a recurring character, it means they're trying to negotiate my rate down of what they're going to pay me. Stargate never said that. I did one episode. It was close to the end of the first season. They wrote me another new episode right at the beginning of the second season. And then there was one in the third season. And then there were 2. And then there was 3. And then there was a season where I did 5. And they just kept writing for me, and it was delicious. And I think a big turning point that sustained me is probably in season 4 or so. Brad Wright, who was the main writer, wrote an episode called Threshold. And he was so kind. He came down just before I left, and he said, I don't say this, he says, because I don't, you don't want to stroke actors too much. He said, but I did not trim a single frame of your stuff in this episode. So he said, thank you very much. And I thought, wow, that's new. Because forever, we shoot stuff and then we go see it. or we see it on television, and inevitably something is cut, and so I think he really grew to like me and like my character. I remember one time I had an offer to do Cyrano, and I accepted it, and well, thanks. I accepted it, and I had got the dates cleared, and then I got a call that they had changed the dates of a Stargate episode, and I was so sort of upset because I wanted. And I spoke to him a little bit, and he just worked it out. He pushed all my stuff onto my days off. I was working Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday on the show, so I went 2 different weeks and filmed Monday, Tuesday, during the day Wednesday, and got on the plane. And he worked it out, and that's really wonderful when they do that, because actors love to work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi. I was just wondering if you could ever be first
Prime?
prime for any Gould god, who would it be?
There was a woman in a bathtub, as I recall.
Okay.
There were some really, really wonderful, wonderful women characters. Although, I'll tell you another great character I love in it was Musetta Vander. She played Tilk's wife in one episode. I mean, it was very odd. Tilk had 3 wives. Did you know he was polygamous? Did you know? Sally Richardson, who's here, was the original. And then I forget who was the other one. Musetta was his wife in the alternate reality. It was a fireman. We were firemen. She was his wife in that episode. Yeah. I wouldn't mind serving his first prime to Amanda, too, I have to admit. Yeah, it's just the Apophis guy I had a problem with. If there were, a nice, benevolent female, I'd be there. I'm all for it.
Thank you.
Hi, Tony, again. Thanks for coming out and talking to all of us today. I was wondering, we all know about the on-screen relationship between Teal'c and Braytak as student and mentor. I was wondering if that gave any sort of a special angle to your relationship with Christopher Judge.
Yeah, I think it did. And I talked a little bit about that yesterday, but it's not, as an actor, you read the script, you understand the character, and you're happy to get the job. You go in and do the audition alone yourself. It's not like you do it with the other actors. And then you realize that, everything I do is based on this person, or the majority of what I do is with this person. And that was Chris. So the first person, when I got on set that day, I kept looking, I kept saying, okay, so who's playing Teal'c? I had no idea. I had no idea if he was a scrawny little kid. I had no idea, and there was this man. And he was curious too, So we went up, I shook hands, and I remember we just looked at each other, and we knew it was going to be fine. And it was just great because we had some really, really intense stuff. Because in that first episode, it's all about what are you doing with these humans? What are you doing? And so it was terrific. Now, Chris, most of you have probably seen Chris. He's just like this. He's this, outrageously, attractive, beautiful, intelligent, walking id. You know what I mean? He's just got, there's so much life in the guy. And so occasionally he's gotten me into trouble. There was a convention in Atlanta one time that I don't remember as much of as I should have, and also, are you a basketball fan?
Yeah.
Well, there used to be the Jordan rules. You remember Michael Jordan, the one Detroit used to have to stop the greatest offensive basketball player ever? Well, there are some of the Judd rules. And the first Judd rule is never stand downwind after lunch. So he always had to keep an eye on Judd. But he's a cut up, but the biggest heart in the world, the most generous man. And that whole set was that way for me because as a guest star, particularly early on, you don't know the people, and my experience is they tend to compress everything a lot of the language stuff, a lot of your heavy text scenes in the first couple of days, the reason they do that is because the other actors, the regular actors, are just getting the script. And they've been shooting all week, so they need time to memorize and prepare. And so you're a little on edge, you know, you think, oh, people are judging you, and they are, you know. But they were always so generous. Amanda, in particular, was so complimentary and welcoming, and Chris. And so it made the job a lot easier. And the best thing about doing Stargate is eventually, unlike going in for one and out, you go in, you do your stuff, and you leave, is that you eventually knew the temperature of the set. You knew people's general behavior, so if someone is acting like a jerk, you think, oh, well, they're having a tough day. You knew the lay of the land, and when a show runs that long, they eventually end up getting rid of the squeaky wheels and the troublemakers. So it makes for a wonderful sort of ride. So,
Thank you.
thank you.
Hi, Tony. Thanks for coming to Phoenix. It's great to have you here. I'm a filmmaker as well as a Stargate fan, so when I buy the DVDs, half the fun is watching you guys on set, behind the scenes, all that stuff. And it looked like it was a great set to be on, super fun, family kind of atmosphere.
Well, it wasn't always family. Well, I see family in that way. I thought you meant family rated. Okay.
No, you guys obviously cohesed into a family, which happens on set. I was wondering if you could talk about, because the show obviously went through a lot of cast changes, with Michael Shanks leaving at the end of season 5, coming back season 7, Richard Dean Anderson leaving, new people coming on for the last 2 seasons. Maybe you could talk about kind of how the tone of the set maybe changed at all because of that?
Yeah, you know, the other interesting thing of popping in and out is that people have good years and bad years. And so Michael, you know, he needed a change. He needed, you know, it was so intense. His work was so intense. He's really good. I mean, very few people handle dialogue. You want to talk about speaking jargon and just getting your mouth around stuff. I mean, Michael is amazing. And he has a new show. It's coming out on NBC. I think it's going to be in June. So look it up. It's a doctor show. And he's the lead. He's one of the leads anyway. So when Michael went away, I had very little contact with Corin, my character. My contact with Corin used to be, you know, hey, hello, you know, a handshake, and then when I'd go to my, you know, the Stargate apartment, his script would be there. And it's only in conventions that I finally got to meet, you know, Corin a bit. He's a great guy. Ben, I think, had some of the arrogance of Richard, too, you know. He had the same sort of thing, but he didn't quite have the humor of Richard. But he made the show continue because all of a sudden we had 2 fan bases. You know, and I used to joke, well, you know, is it Starscape or is it Fargate? Is it, what do you go? But who was wonderful, I thought, too, was Claudia. I thought Claudia was... You know, she would crack me up so much, you know. Like we were doing one, I forget, it might be the last episode that I was in. I was sort of in the hospital and, it had to be second to the last I was in. I was in the hospital bed again, and I've been attacked by someone. And it was a tough scene because they had, 6, 8 characters around me. It's very hard. It takes a lot of time to photograph, groups of 2 and 3 and then individuals and everything. And they're trying to keep it compressed. And it was getting a little spread. And Claudia said, well, I can fix that. And she just sort of jumped around on the bed and just started kneeling. And, I hadn't even met her. And I thought, oh, good for you. So, it changed. To this day, some people will say, oh, I missed Michael and I miss Corin. And, oh, God, thank God, Ben was such a wonderful, so everybody's got their opinion. And the reason I think it is a kind of affection that you have towards the show that you either appreciate the change or you don't. It's like getting a new brother-in-law or sister-in-law. Sometimes you just sort of shake your head, and other times you just meet the person you think, oh, great, I trust them. I think they're terrific. And that's the way it was on the set. But none of it disrupted anything. And the fact that we got 10 years out of it is just a testament primarily to the writing. We must, because sometimes I feel like fans get the wrong idea. That this stuff. Of course, I know that you know this, but you have to remember how strong the writing is on that show. It's just amazing to me. So,
Thanks.
thank you.
Hello.
Hey.
You were talking about the episode that where Christopher Judge or Teal'c was going between human life and Jaffa life. That was actually one of my favorite episodes because you also played his stepdad, I believe.
Yes.
Who was dying of kidney failure.
Right.
You were trying to. Both of you were both stoic in most of the season. So when this episode came up, were you guys both excited about it? I mean, you guys were actually showing some emotion. If not.
Yeah, we were. It was very, very interesting to do some of that scene, the scene with the fire and stuff, and to be in an alternate reality is always sort of interesting. But I don't, to be honest with you, I don't remember being any more excited about it than I was by other episodes. I liked a lot of the fighting episodes. I liked a lot of the, I loved working with Lou Gossett. Around my birthday, which is in August, Isaac Hayes was doing an episode, and got to have "Happy Birthday" sung to me, by Isaac Hayes. That's not bad. So there were plenty that. There was the variety of of having sort of an Earth persona, and I did enjoy that, and that was in Teal'c's mind in a kind of way. So that was interesting, and where that went, and I think he used to call me. I think he called me Bray in that too,
Bray,
didn't he? Yeah. So it was fun, but there were so many that were fun.
Well, I can understand why you would like the fighting scenes too, because every time I'd see him, I'm like, "Don't mess with Braytag."
Don't mess with Braytag. Yeah. But anyway,
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi. I had a question you were talking about the fighting. What was the most difficult physically thing to do as Braytag?
The most difficult physical thing to do is Braytag. I remember it wasn't really that difficult, but it was sort of tricky. We had to be very, very still. There was a scene where it's a great scene where we've been ambushed, and everyone has been killed. I mean, they used hundreds of extras surrounding us, and it was an aerial shot, and we were right on the Fraser River, so that there was sort of a lapping tide sort of thing coming in on us, and it was the scene where Teal'c and I are sharing the symbiote, and that was great fun and hard to be that still as as the waves are coming in and hitting you in the head. But physically, I always just really, really enjoyed the challenge, and because of the fact that with the boots and with the cape, the metal cape, and with so many of the other aspects of it, probably the whole outfit weighed 45 pounds maybe, that no matter how hard I worked during the day, when I took it off, I always felt like I was ready for the evening. It always, if you're a basketball player, we used to wear ankle weights. And when you took those off, you felt like you can jump higher, and your legs just felt, it was a little bit like that with that outfit. So occasionally, having to shave my belly, for the symbiote, it's just sort of, and hearing Richard sing show tunes in a glider for 2 hours. I think that's permanently hurt my hearing. But anyway, no, it was a treat, and I've had the hardest work. I did a couple of films of sci-fi films that were on the Sci-Fi Channel that were shot in Bulgaria in winter, at night in the snow. Now that's cold. That's cold. But I don't want to give you guys the wrong idea. We are so happy to be working, and we're in a profession that on any given day, 90 to 95% of the members of the union aren't working. So just to be working gives us a huge tolerance, and occasionally, it all has. I remember I did an arc on Dexter, and the first scene I had was with Michael Hall, who he knows I killed his mother, and I'm sort of responsible for his addiction to this thing, and I don't know who he is. He comes into a bar, and that whole day, 12 hours, we beat up on each other. That's all it was. It was just 2 actors that whole day. And we didn't use any stunt guys. They were there, but then they realized we were okay. And so that day, I came home, had a little bite to eat, had a hot toddy, and took a muscle relaxant and went to bed. Now, that was a hard day. But I have to say, I still went to sleep with a smile on my face. Even though I was going, I mean, it was still
It was worth
a
it.
day's work well done. I mean, we want to work. We want to provide something that you guys will enjoy. And we do. I think the majority of the actors feel like you care and you can tell the difference. Because there's some actors who will just think, well, they don't know the difference. You do, and it's not even conscious sometimes. There's like, excuse my language, but there's a bullshit meter in us, and because oddly enough, actors are surrogates for your daydreams and for your fantasies and for the sort of human sort of desires, that we don't let those actors into our deepest selves unless there's something truthful about the emotion or the belief or something. I really do believe that. So
Thank you.
thank you.
Hey. Hi. I have another question.
Sure.
Last year we had Leonard Nimoy here, and he explained the whole genesis behind the Vulcan hand gesture. And it got me thinking about some of my favorite sci-fi characters' iconic gestures. And I have to ask you, what was the history behind the Hammond of Texas?
I think it had to do with, Richard talking about him and then seeing him and then realizing that somehow his Don's dome paralleled my Japhamica. We used to call it Japhamica, our little. That was, Rich. That was Peter DeLuise. We used to joke, but that somehow, I don't know, it just came. But it felt so right, that it was oddly reverential and respectful, but it was also sort of humorous, and that's where it came from. And someone asked me just recently, did they write that gesture in the script? Did you? No. That was. And once we found it, we brought it back, 3 or 4 times, and it was great fun. And I'm really thrilled that that's one of the things that tickled you, because it tickled me. And it's not often the case that that an actor's favorite moments are an audience's favorite moments. So,
Thank you.
thank you.
So, when you were in full armor as a Jaffa, how long did it take you to get in there, and how much do you think it weighed?
Well, like I was saying earlier, it probably weighed 45 to 50 pounds. The boots were particularly heavy. But, you need a little help. And then there was a great episode that made it a lot easier. They wrote an episode where Terry, it's funny, he's an actor in Continuum, Terry Chang, I believe his name is. He played a monk. And it was sort of a Japanese-themed episode. And I went in, I have a consultation talking about, that I believe it's time for me to pass it on to the younger generation and to move on. And we have this great sort of discussion. Well, to enter into this sacred thing, I said, Braytak needs to take his boots. He's not going to be a guy who's just going to, he has respect for, a holy place. And they said, no, you're right. So they had to figure out a way of getting my boots on and off pretty quickly. So they developed this sort of snap system that was really well hid. And so consequently, after that, season 5 probably, it became easier to get in and out of. But previous to that, it would take 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and you needed someone to help you. So there was a great dresser, and they wrote a play called The Dresser, because they are people that help actors enormously, and our dresser, his name was Barry. And, you end up spending more time with Barry than you do with your camera operator, and it's sort of interesting. But it weighs about 45 to 50 pounds, and it took about 20 minutes to do the whole thing. And the makeup wasn't bad. That would take another 20 minutes. But, they generally bring you in. So if they were starting at 7, they bring me in at about 5:45 in the morning. So that means they pick me up at about 5:30. So how are those hours for you? Do you get up at 5:30 often? Which means you have to get up at about 5 a.m. Is that, what time do you get up for school?
I'm homeschooled.
Oh, you're you're perfect for an actor then. You have any other questions?
Nope, that's it.
Thank you.
Mr. Amendola, again,
Hey.
thanks for coming out.
Sure.
It's a pleasure to see you here. You said in acting there are some good years and bad years. It was pretty apparent in the show that funding was pretty low toward the end of the series, and then here and there throughout the series. What was the mood of the actors and the crew those years?
I didn't really notice it that much, but it's always true that the longer series runs, the salaries become higher for everyone around, and consequently, inevitably, networks try to actually do the series for less money, so there's always a little pull. I never really felt that. I have to say, honestly, I never felt that. And that's probably a question that would be, that either Chris or Michael or Amanda or Richard, Ben, would probably have a much better inside track. For me, it was never an issue, So,
Thanks.
Sure.
Oh, good to see you again.
Hey,
but,
good to see you.
Something.
I know what you got there. What you wearing there? Did you make that?
Yeah. Oh, I was on from yesterday. I had the whole helmet.
Yeah, that's. Oh, okay.
Yeah. So
he has an Apophis helmet.
But so it hasn't been brought up yesterday or today. But had you seen the original movie before you started?
Of course, yeah.
You did see it.
Oh yeah, I loved it.
Yeah.
Who was that woman? There was a great the archaeologist, the woman, the older woman, Vivica.
Catherine. Yep.
Yes, Vivica Linford. I thought she was sensational in it, and I mean I liked. I have to say that I thought, to me, for my money, and Kurt Russell is great, but Kurt Russell played one serious note. He played what happened to his kid, and that I mean his whole. And Richard to me was the key to the success of the series in many ways, because I mean it was always tricky with Richard, because you go in and you realize you got a scene with Richard Dean Anderson, the star of the film, and it's a 3-page scene, and you have all the dialogue, and Richard would just look at you, and he just not. And you just ramble it all off as if you knew. And then right at the very end, he'd figure out a way of taking out a little pin, and he'd just pierce the balloon. And that was it. And all the hot air would just be released. So that, number one, and the humor Richard brought to it. And I've always said this too. Richard was brilliant at two things. He became the surrogate for the audience, that he was the skeptic. He himself was the skeptic to all of this stuff. So consequently, the audience could get behind him. He wasn't afraid to be foolish and funny. And most importantly, to me, some actors lead by their seriousness. I am a serious actor, and I only do serious things, and trust me, just watch me. And Richard is a reluctant actor. He'd much rather do the comedy. He's sort of reluctant. But when you need him, when he's touched, and when they write something personal for him, boy, can he deliver, I felt. I really felt he could deliver, and it was all the more powerful because he's been a cut-up the majority of the time. So I always thought, wow, look at him, because he always tried to say, no, I don't do that. I don't do serious acting.
It's funny, you more or less answered my follow-up question that was completely random, but I was going to say, other than singing in the glider and having to endure that, what was your other favorite Richard Dean Anderson moment?
I saw Richard in Germany maybe last year, and I was sitting maybe here, and he was sitting down here, and we were at a press conference, and there were some of the other sci-fi people from various shows were there, and Richard sort of leaned over and he looked at me, and he looked out, and we just answered some questions, and then he went. Like he just, it took him 5 minutes, and then he finally realized, oh, and I don't know why that tickled me, because he operates in his own world. What else? I don't know. Richard gave me a great weekend. My wife and I, a great weekend one time when he got the stomach flu. So I was really appreciative of that. You know, what else about Richard? I don't know. You know, I mean, he was always pretty wonderful. But you had to watch him in a scene because he's very, very clever. You know, some of the better actors in theater often, you know, the line loads dictate the importance of the actor because generally people like to watch who's speaking. In film and television, that's not true because the theater is more democratic in that way that if there are 3 actors on a stage, even though a person is speaking and your attention should go to them, should you choose to feel like, oh, he or she is boring, you can always look wherever you want. And you can't do that in film and television because, you know, that vision, that choice is made by the director and the editor. And consequently, Richard, you know, can become a focus of a scene even though he hardly has any lines on it. You know, so he knew that. He was very, very smart and very, very clever. And good film actors sometimes will go through a scene, and as opposed to seeing how many lines they had, they can see how many lines they can get rid of. That it really not necessary to them. And I remember doing, God, what was it? I think it was like Chicago Hope, or it was one of those episodes, and I was sitting around with the producer, and one of the regular actors came up and had a quick conference, and they were talking. He was a little animated, and the producer was like, calm down, calm down. And he came to me afterwards. He says, you actors. I said, what? He says, look, this guy's got a great job. You know, he's making blank, 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 you know, a week. And he's asking me, he just did a scene. He got to play a scene with James Earl Jones. And he's asking me, when we cut the scene, will it be 50-50 coverage? And I assured him it would be 50-50 coverage. But you have to understand, I paid James Earl Jones $150,000 to do this episode. So I am going to focus on him. You know, and that's simply the reality. And, but, you know, Richard also, you know, needed the break. And he went away, and that's when Ben came in. And it's always so great. You know, you notice some of the old timers like Don and myself, we pretty much, you know, pretty much stayed as long as we could, you know, and because we've been around and we know that, you know, an actor's life is like a trampoline if they're lucky. Otherwise, it's like a hit and run. You're out there, you're laid down. And so Don and I, we would just smile. We'd have lunch together and just, you know, talk about, you know, how wacky the kids are sometimes, you know. Anyway. That's a roundabout answer. I forget. I know you didn't ask that question.
No.
That's what I thought. I went on so long, the person probably is gone. Anyway, go ahead.
We do have time for one more question.
Okay, cool. My question is going to be about the props. From the Eureka panel, Sheriff Carter had kept a couple items of his. Were there anything that you kept from your display, and how much did
I have a couple of the. I'm sorry. What was the last bit of it?
Like the general cost of the props. How'd you get them? Were they custom or?
Well, you know, I only have some of the head things, you know, that I wore. That's it. So there was no cost. They were worn out, and they used to do. You get 3 or 4 episodes out of one, and then they continued. So there was no cost. But that was all I have. I'm trying to think. Yeah, I'm certain I wasn't up there for the very final episode, so I didn't get the scavenger as much. So,
okay, cool.
Yeah. Okay. Now, are we almost done?
I believe so.
Okay. Now, I do have to say something to you guys because I know, you know, I did a Voyager, I did a Star Trek, you know, and yet I'm associated with Stargate, and I know you guys get pulled. So I do want to tell you one thing. You ain't nothing but a Trekkie, rocking all the time. You ain't nothing but a Trekkie, rocking all the time. But if you ain't seen Stargate, you ain't no friend of mine.
Tony Amendola, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for coming.
One last thing. Please come and see me. I'm going to be signing over there. Just take a look. Come and say hello. And I'll be here tomorrow for the early portion. I think I take off probably about 2:30. So if you haven't been around, please come and say hi. Ciao.